Have you ever poured your soul into your work, every ounce of energy, every waking hour, only to watch others glide past you with half the effort and twice the results? You arrive before dawn, leave long after the lights dim, yet promotions, breakthroughs, and abundance seem to find everyone but you. You're exhausted, burned out, running on fumes while those around you thrive. If that fire of frustration burns in your chest right now, know this. You're not alone and you're not broken. You're simply swinging a dull axe. In a quiet valley cradled by rolling hills where the earth had fed families for generations, lived a 32-year-old farmer named Thomas. He had inherited a modest 10-acre plot from his father, a sacred trust he vowed to honor. Thomas believed in one unshakable truth: hard work is the only path to victory. No shortcuts, no excuses, just relentless, bone-deep effort. Every morning at 4:00 a.m., while the world still slept, Thomas rose. He refused machines, modern tools, anything that felt like cheating. "My grandfather built this life with his hands," he would say, "and so will I." He planted every seed one by one. He hauled water in heavy buckets across uneven rows. He pulled weeds until his fingers bled and his back screamed in protest. Sunrise to sunset, he toiled. At night he collapsed into bed, too drained to eat properly, too weary to hold meaningful conversation with his wife, Sarah. Sarah watched her husband fade before her eyes. "Thomas," she pleaded softly one evening, tears brimming, "you're killing yourself. There has to be a better way." He would squeeze her hand, force a tired smile, and reply, "Success demands sacrifice, Sarah. Hard work never fails. I just need to push harder." The neighbors saw him and whispered in awe and sorrow. "That man works like three," they said. If sheer grit could make a king, Thomas would wear a crown. Yet the brutal truth cut deeper than any scythe. Despite double the hours of anyone else, his harvests barely sustained them. Debt crept closer each season. His crops were average, his yields mediocre, and worst of all, joy had vanished from his life. No laughter with Sarah, no time for dreams beyond survival. Across the fence lived Richard, same age, same land size, started with even less. Yet Richard worked only from 8:00 a.m. to 2:00 p.m. He embraced drip irrigation, seasonal help, smart planning. Evenings he spent reading, walking hand in hand with his family, living. And somehow his fields burst with life, twice the bounty of Thomas. Every night staring at the ceiling, Thomas felt the sting of that contrast like salt in an open wound. Why him? Why did effort alone feel like punishment? Then came the drought. Water turned precious. Crops began to wither. Thomas doubled down. He rose at 3:00 a.m., carried buckets until his body rebelled. 50 trips, 60, his vision blurred, his heart hammered irregularly. On the 15th day, mid-stride with a sloshing bucket, his legs buckled. The water spilled uselessly into dust. Thomas collapsed among dying stalks, gasping, broken. Sarah found him there. The doctor's verdict was merciless. "Your body is shutting down, dehydration, exhaustion. You're one step from a heart attack. If you continue, you won't live to see another harvest." Lying in bed that night, IV line in his arm, Thomas stared into the darkness and felt the foundation of his life crack. For the first time, defeat wasn't from the drought. It was from within. "I did everything right," he whispered to Sarah, voice trembling. "I sacrificed everything. Why am I failing?" She held his hand tightly. "Maybe, my love, hard work isn't the whole answer. Maybe there's something you haven't learned yet." Those words echoed through the silence, planting the tiniest seed of possibility in a heart that had known only struggle.
Subscribe now. Make sure to share for more stories like this.
That night in the dim hospital room, with only the soft beep of machines and the drip of IV fluid breaking the silence, Thomas lay awake. Defeat wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, but beneath it flickered something powerful, a spark of curiosity. For the first time, he allowed himself to question the one belief that had defined his entire life. 3 days later, still weak but determined, Thomas walked the short path to Richard's farm. His steps were slow, his shoulders slumped, yet there was a new humility in his posture. He knocked on the door. Richard opened it, surprise melting into genuine warmth. "Thomas, I heard what happened. Come in, my friend, sit. You look like you could use some shade and a cool drink." They settled on Richard's wide porch, overlooking fields so lush and green they seemed to glow under the afternoon sun. Thomas stared at the thriving crops, rows perfectly spaced, water glistening on leaves from an efficient drip system, and felt envy twist with wonder. "Richard," Thomas began, voice low and raw, "I need to know. I work twice as long, pour every drop of myself into that land. Yet you finish by early afternoon and produce twice what I do. How? What am I missing?" Richard studied him for a long moment, then rose. "Come with me. Words alone won't show you. Let me show you the truth." They walked to the tool shed. Richard picked up two axes, one old, dull, its edge chipped and rusted, the other gleaming, razor-sharp, handle smooth from careful use. "Imagine two woodcutters racing to fell trees," Richard said, handing Thomas the dull axe and pointing to a thick log. "Go on, swing." Thomas gripped the handle and swung. The blade bounced off the wood with a dull thud, barely scratching the surface. He swung again, harder, grunting with effort. After 10 swings, sweat beaded on his brow and the log showed only a shallow notch. Richard took the sharp axe. One clean, powerful swing bit deep into the wood. 3 more, precise and effortless, and the log split cleanly in two with a satisfying crack. "The first woodcutter," Richard explained, "works 12 hours straight, never pausing, convinced more swings mean more trees felled. He mocks the second for stopping every hour to sharpen his blade, wasting time, he says. But by day's end, the second has felled twice as many trees. His axe cuts deeper with less force. His body stays strong. His mind stays clear." Thomas stared at the split log, then at his blistered hands. The metaphor landed like lightning. "You've been swinging a dull axe for years, Thomas," Richard continued gently. "You call it honor, you call it grit, but it's just suffering dressed up as virtue. Hard work matters, but only when it's aimed right." They walked through Richard's farm. He pointed to the drip irrigation line snaking quietly beneath the soil. "This system waters everything while I sleep. No buckets, no endless hauling. It cost money and time to build, but now it frees me." He gestured to neat rows of just 2 crops, high-value varieties perfectly suited to the soil. "I don't grow 5 things poorly. I master 2 things excellently. Focus creates abundance. Spreading yourself thin creates mediocrity." Finally, Richard looked at Thomas with steady eyes. "And rest. Rest isn't laziness, it's strategy. A rested mind spots problems before they grow. A rested body works stronger. You're so exhausted you miss the obvious fixes. Your mistakes cost more time than the rest ever would." He placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You're not failing because you lack effort, my friend. You're failing because effort without wisdom is just motion. There's a difference between being busy and being effective, between swinging harder and swinging smarter." Thomas felt something shift inside him, deep, tectonic, not defeat anymore, hope, real, burning hope. That evening he returned home, mind racing with possibility. For the first time in years, he didn't rush to the fields at dusk. Instead, he sat with Sarah at the kitchen table, notebook open, eyes bright despite the fatigue. "Teach me to think differently," he said quietly. Sarah smiled, tears glistening. "We'll learn together." The spark had caught flame. Thomas was ready, not to work harder but to work wiser. The next morning, Thomas did the unthinkable. Instead of rising at 4:00 a.m. and charging into the fields like a man possessed, he woke at 6:00 a.m. He made coffee, real coffee, not the instant sludge he usually gulped, and sat at the kitchen table with Sarah. A notebook lay open between them. For the first time in years, the house felt quiet, peaceful, alive with possibility rather than exhaustion. "I'm not quitting," Thomas said firmly, meeting Sarah's hopeful gaze. "I'm starting over, smarter this time." They began small. Thomas listed every task he did daily: planting, weeding, watering, harvesting, selling at market. Next to each, he wrote how many hours it consumed. The numbers stared back at him like an accusation: hours upon hours of repetitive, back-breaking labor that produced so little return. The biggest thief: watering. 6 hours a day carrying buckets. 6 hours of pure motion that left him drained and the crops only barely alive. Richard's words echoed: "Don't carry water in buckets if you can build a pipeline." Thomas stood up. "I'm going to the agricultural office today, no more guessing." He borrowed the neighbor's bicycle and rode into town. At the extension office, a kind agent named Mrs. Adebio listened patiently as he described his farm, his collapse, his desperation to change. She pulled out brochures, showed him diagrams of drip irrigation systems, simple setups using perforated hoses, gravity-fed tanks, even low-cost solar pumps for deeper wells. "It's not magic," she told him. "It's investment. Spend money and time once, save thousands of hours forever." Thomas left with price lists, supplier contacts, and a fire in his chest he hadn't felt since he was a boy dreaming of making his father proud. Back home, he and Sarah crunched numbers. They had one old, rarely used tractor rusting in the barn. Selling it would cover most of a basic drip system. They agreed. Sacrifice the symbol of traditional hard work for real progress. Within 2 weeks, the tractor was gone. A delivery truck arrived with coils of black tubing, connectors, and a small elevated tank. Installation was grueling: 3 full days of digging shallow trenches, laying lines, testing pressure. But Thomas didn't complain. Every shovel of dirt felt like purpose, not punishment. On the fourth morning, he turned the valve. Water hissed softly through the lines, seeping directly to the roots of every plant. No buckets, no endless trips. In 20 minutes, the entire 10 acres were watered, more evenly, more efficiently than he had ever managed in a full day. Thomas stood in the field, watching droplets sparkle on green leaves like tiny diamonds. Tears pricked his eyes, not from pain, from relief, from the sudden, shocking realization that he could produce more by doing less. The time he saved became rocket fuel. He researched soil health, composting techniques, crop rotation, natural pest control. He narrowed his planting to just 2 crops: high-yield maize and premium okra, the varieties that thrived in their soil and fetched the best prices at market. No more spreading himself across 5 mediocre crops. Focus became his new weapon. He hired a neighbor's teenage son, Emeka, for peak seasons, paying him fairly, teaching him the new systems. 1 hour of Emeka's help during harvest saved Thomas 10 hours of exhaustion. But the deepest change wasn't in the fields. It was inside the house. Evenings, Thomas came home with energy. He sat with Sarah at dinner, real conversations, laughter, shared dreams. He played football with his 2 young children in the yard until the stars came out. He started walking in the mornings, not rushing, just breathing, thinking, planning. His body grew stronger. His mind grew sharper. Friends noticed first. "Thomas, you're working less, but you look alive," one said, shaking his head in wonder. Thomas smiled. "I'm not working less, I'm working smarter. Turns out you can't think clearly when you're running on empty." 6 months passed like a dream. The next harvest arrived. Thomas's fields, now perfectly irrigated, strategically planted, attentively managed, burst with life. The maize stood tall and golden, the okra pods heavy and abundant. When the final tally came in, the yield was 40% higher than his best previous year. Not because he had worked harder, because every hour had been aimed like an arrow instead of scattered like shotgun pellets. One evening, Richard walked over. He strolled through the rows, touching leaves, nodding slowly. "You did it," he said quietly. "You sharpened the axe." Thomas clasped his friend's hand. "I stopped swinging blindly. Thank you for showing me there was even an edge to sharpen." Richard grinned. Now you're not just a hard worker, Thomas, you're becoming unstoppable. As the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in fire and gold, Thomas looked out over his transformed land and felt something he had almost forgotten. Pride not in suffering, in creation. The dull axe was gone, the sharp one was in his hands, and he was only just beginning.
Subscribe now. Make sure to share for more stories like this.
The sun rose on harvest day like a quiet promise kept. Thomas walked his fields at dawn, not rushing, not frantic, but steady and clear-eyed. The maize stood tall in perfect rows, golden tassels swaying gently in the breeze. The okra plants were heavy with deep green pods, each one plump and ready. No wilting leaves, no patchy spots, just abundance born from intention. Emeka, the teenage helper, arrived whistling, already unloading crates. Together they worked side by side, efficient, focused, laughing when a particularly fat pod slipped from their hands. What once took Thomas and Sarah weeks of aching labor now wrapped up in 4 joyful days. Every motion mattered, every hour delivered. When the final bushel was weighed and tallied at the market cooperative, the number hit Thomas like a warm wave, 40% above his personal best. Not a miracle, not luck. Results from sharpened focus, leveraged systems, and the courage to rest. That evening, the entire family gathered under the big mango tree in the yard. Sarah had prepared a feast, fresh maize roasted over open fire, okra stew rich with palm oil, cold hibiscus tea. The children ran circles around the table, faces glowing in the lantern light. Thomas sat back, plate full, heart fuller, watching his family laugh and talk without the shadow of exhaustion hanging over them. For the first time in years, he wasn't too tired to be present. Later, after the children were asleep and the stars blanketed the sky, Thomas and Sarah walked the quiet rows together. The irrigation lines hummed softly beneath the soil, working even now while everyone rested. "You kept your promise," Sarah said, slipping her hand into his. "You didn't quit, you just changed the rules." Thomas squeezed her fingers. "I used to think sacrifice meant suffering. Now I know the real sacrifice was believing I had to suffer to succeed." They stopped at the edge of the field. Richard's farm glowed faintly in the distance, lights on in the house, a family probably sharing their own evening. Thomas smiled. "He didn't give me answers," Thomas said quietly. "He gave me questions, and those questions saved me." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "What now?" Thomas looked out over the land, his land alive and thriving. "Now we keep sharpening. We teach Emeka everything we've learned. Maybe expand to 15 acres next year, but only if the systems support it. We build something that lasts not just for us, but for our children. And we never forget, hard work is the foundation. Strategy is the structure. Rest is the roof that keeps it all standing." He turned to her, eyes bright with certainty. "We're not machines, Sarah. We're creators. And creators need sharp tools, clear minds, and full hearts." Months turned to seasons. Word spread quietly through the valley. Farmers began stopping by, not to pity Thomas anymore, but to ask questions. "How did you double your yield without doubling your hours? What's that black tubing doing? Can you show me?" Thomas welcomed them all. He showed them the drip lines, the focused crop list, the compost piles. He told them the story, not of collapse, but of awakening. And every time he ended the same way. "Hard work is honorable, but hard work without wisdom is just noise. Sharpen your axe before you swing. Rest so you can see. Focus so you can win. You don't have to break yourself to build something great." One afternoon, a young farmer, barely 20, eyes hungry like Thomas once had been, asked the question that mattered most. "Does it ever feel wrong to work less and get more?" Thomas laughed softly, the sound free and light. "At first, yes, it felt like cheating. Then I realized the real cheat was letting myself believe exhaustion was the price of success. The truth is simpler. The most successful people don't work the longest hours. They work the smartest ones." He clapped the young man on the shoulder. Go home tonight, sharpen your axe. Tomorrow, swing with purpose. As the valley changed, one farmer, one system, one rested mind at a time, Thomas stood on his porch each evening, watching the sun set over fields that once nearly broke him. He no longer wore exhaustion like a badge. He wore peace. And in that peace, he found something far more powerful than endless toil. Freedom. Freedom to dream bigger. Freedom to love deeper. Freedom to live fully. Because the greatest harvest isn't measured in bushels. It's measured in lives reclaimed, families reunited at the table, and hearts no longer chained to the myth that suffering equals success. Thomas had learned the final truth. Strategy doesn't replace hard work. It multiplies it. And when you multiply wisdom with effort, rest with focus, systems with sweat, there is no limit to what you can grow. So if you're reading this, feeling the weight of that dull axe in your own hands, hear this. You are not failing because you aren't trying hard enough. You're just ready to sharpen. Stop swinging blindly. Start cutting deep. Your harvest is waiting. And it's going to be beautiful.
Subscribe now. Make sure to share for more stories like this.